Hi, I'm Laura Donna Carson, and today we're going to talk about cultural differences. In part one, we're going to talk about understanding culture as it relates to practice. Today, we're going to talk about defining the word culture, why we should even care about the word culture, and start to talk about how cultural differences can impact your practice. So, what is culture? We've all heard the word, we use it, intercultural, multicultural, all sorts of hybrid words with culture. But what is culture? When we really stop to think about it, it's a pretty big word and has a lot of implied meanings, a lot of implicit meanings. So the first thing I'd like to do is look at Dr. Gerrit Hofstede. He defined culture as the collective programming of the mind that distinguishes the members of one group or category of people from others. And in that, he talks about a cultural norm, which indicates the value actually held by a majority, keeping in mind that there are individual differences within each society. And that is really important. One of the things I want you to take away from today is that you have to approach culture with a big tablespoon of salt. You know, they always say a grain of salt, but in this case, I mean a tablespoon of salt, because even though there are cultural norms, there's so much variation in culture. Just like we talked about in the other lecture on individual personality, when we looked at the 16 main personality types that could be made up of intuitor, thinker, feeler, perceiver, judger, all of those categories. In culture, there's even thousands of variations within a culture. Why would we even bother to study it then? Is because it gives us a handle. And from that handle, we can begin to explore our similarities as well as our differences. One of the main benefits of studying culture is we really begin to identify what does it mean to be human, and what are the expressions of that humanity throughout the various cultures of the world. Culture, as we know it, consists of two parts, and this is really interesting to me. We have the seen and the unseen. So here in the visible iceberg is all you see of something. You don't know that underneath it there's a very large block of ice that is unseen. Well, they all make up the iceberg. So we're talking about iceberg, 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 and all we're thinking about is this upper part here. But really there's the rest of it too. And culture is the same way. We talk about culture and we talk about what we know about culture. Those are the things that we can see about it. But there's also what we can't see. And it makes it difficult sometimes. What I mean by seen and unseen is that in what's seen, we have clothes, words, gestures, body language, images, and external reactions. So things that you can see with your eye. But what's unseen about culture, the beliefs, the values, the attitudes, the biases, internal reactions that are not visible. Those are the things that are harder to unpack when we talk about what is culture. How do we acquire culture? Well, it's pretty obvious that you learn it at home. Everybody knows that they learn about their culture majority from their parents, from their relatives, from their communities. But culture is even more diffuse than that, because you also learn about your culture through school, through any religious training you might have. And lately, in the past 50 years, you have to add to that media. Now, before there was media, there was word of mouth, and that was how you got your culture. But in this day and age, people get a lot of cultural information from media. In fact, when people who don't live in the United States think that they know about American culture, and they think they're experts on it practically, and you ask them, how did you know? How did you learn about American culture? They'll usually tell you from the movies, from television and from the movies. We export our culture all over the world, all over the globe. People are convinced that they know exactly what it means to be American. I teach a lot of international students at Cal Lutheran, and they're always telling me how surprised they are because we're not like the movies and we're not like TV. And we're so three-dimensional, and we're so non-predictable, and we're so difficult to generalize. And it's so difficult for them to make the leap because what they're shown in the media are the best and the worst examples of what it means to be from the United States or from North America. What they see on film, you would just make these rash generalizations about what it was like to be an American. So unfortunately, we have to work against the media stereotypes, but we have to do the same thing, because when we think about what we know about other cultures, how did we learn those things about other cultures? Often we learn them from the movies as well. Stereotypes of, for example, Italians. I'm half Italian, and all my life people would say, oh, you're from the mafia. Oh, your father drove a gondola in Venice. They have these sort of stereotypes. Was he a fruit or vegetable seller in Naples? They have these images that they picked up from TV and movies. Or they watch the old movies, and so they have this sort of example of Italian young men riding around on Vespas and being very suave and debonair. Italy is as diverse as the United States is, and there's every type of person in Italy as well. However, you can make some generalizations, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We also learn about culture in our growing up phase from our friends, and we almost form little mini tribes where within a larger culture, we have smaller cultural groups that are very, very important to us. And you can see that if you have children, if you have nieces and nephews, you can see how different your cultural age group is from theirs. I happen to have two children that are 8 years apart, and I can see how their friend groups are so different in those 8 years, and what they think about and what they care about, and the music that they watch or listen to, or both watch and listen to. We didn't used to watch music when I was growing up. We listened to it, but today people watch it because they're always watching the videos. But even in 8 years, the tribes can change, and there can be different cultural values. Even though they're from the exact same home, you can have the time that you were born can cause differences in culture. So friends are great transmitters of culture. The home really is where you form things that are going to last you for your whole life, whether you reject them outwardly and try to move as far away from them as you can because you don't like them. But you still carry some of those invisible things inside you about belief about how people should organize and how they should behave and how close we should be to others and how much we should share with others. That's why this part of culture is so important to practice management, because it really is true that different cultures have different comfort levels with sharing information, especially financial information. And different cultures care more about forming close friendships and close relationships before discussing really, really closely held topics like money management. The step one that we're trying to go through in this lecture is about intercultural awareness. So this first step for you is to become aware of culture and to think about your own culture and how it has shaped you. That is actually a huge assignment, because most of what we think, believe, feel, perceive are automatic reflexes. We don't think about how we got to that expression. We have beliefs and viewpoints about race and about race relations and about different other cultures and how we relate to other cultures. We have these almost hardwired into us from our home life, from our early life. And often we don't stop to unpack those. But when we get into business, when we get into a situation where we are going to be dealing with people from all over the globe in our daily life, and as the United States becomes more and more multicultural, and we have more and more cultures represented just on the norm in our daily life, it really behooves us to think about our own culture and how it has shaped us. And the second step is to learn about other cultures. To learn about other cultures, it sort of starts this mosaic pattern that you'll gain awareness of how the other cultures relate to our culture and where any problems can arise, where you might not think exactly the same way, where you might unintentionally give offense. You weren't intending to at all, And as a business person, you want to not do that. So you have to first understand where both cultures are your own and the other person's are coming from, and find out where they're the same and where they're different. And again, I always focus on finding the human, the part that is the same, the part where all human beings share certain they're human, and they share family structures, and they share love of people, and they share a desire to protect their family and protect their personal belongings and pass on their inheritance. These are just basic human things. Really, all cultures have them. And the more you look at what all cultures have, you start to see where you can really build on your shared values. One of the things that's really important is to avoid what we call an ethnocentric logic. Now, to unpack the word ethnocentric, it means to put your own culture at the center. So you put your own ethnicity at the center. Sometimes, even within a country, there's different ethnicities. So within the United States, you could be an ethnocentric Hispanic, you could be an ethnocentric African American, you could be an ethnocentric Caucasian, all within the United States. Anytime that your own ethnicity is put at the center of your logic and is your main focal point, and you're not thinking about other cultures and other ethnicities' rights to be in their logic that they share, then you're said to be ethnocentric. And it's something that we want to avoid, something that we want to eliminate as much as we can. It's hard, and it's almost impossible to completely eliminate it. So how do you do that? Your goal is to be open to people without preconception, and to become familiar with the nonverbal cues in your own culture, and think about how other cultures do things, so that you understand that even something as simple as a handshake can be problematic in a lot of different ways. For example, in some Middle Eastern cultures, a gentleman would not shake a lady's hand. It just wouldn't be done. He wouldn't touch her. They're not related, not either through marriage or through family ties. And so a gentleman might feel uncomfortable shaking a lady's hand. You don't know if the Middle Easterners that you're dealing with, whether culturally they're very strict, or they're very recent arrivals to this country, they're very non-Americanized, and perhaps you're just doing something as simple as trying to shake your client's hand, and you notice that the client pulls their hand away and that they're uncomfortable with it. Well, you certainly don't want to persist. You certainly want to be aware that something as simple as a handshake could be problematic. So you want to know these things. You can even ask, to the client, if they would shake hands or prefer not to. And sometimes they'll just tell you. I teach a lot of Saudi students, and a lot of both ladies and gentlemen. And some of my male students will shake my hand when we meet for the first time, and some will not. I had a student for 3 years who was here working on his dissertation, and we were very close. I saw him often, and he would not shake my hand. And it to him was just the most normal thing in the world to not shake my hand. And if we were in a row of people, he would shake the gentleman's hands and not mine. And that was, to him, it was being extremely respectful to me as a woman. And I got used to it, and I didn't take it personally, and I just went about my business and didn't even think about it. But the first time it happened, I put my hand out to him and he didn't take it. And it was really strange to me, because I was always in the habit of shaking hands as a business person. And it didn't even occur to me, oh, wow, this was an issue. So I had to learn that. It was very early in my career of dealing with Saudi students, and I had to begin to learn about their culture. And I had to ask questions. And I had to ask questions both of the men and the women, because sometimes people don't wish to say things. They're afraid it will insult you. So you get a lot of informants. You have to ask more than one person. Sometimes the answer will be couched, or it will be half. But if you ask enough people, you'll begin to piece together what that culture's comfort zone is. You'll also find that certain groups of people sit closer to you, or want less personal space, or some people want more. You'll find that some people like a lot of backslapping, and some people are very uncomfortable if you touch them. So interestingly, you are going to acquire a vast amount of personal knowledge based on the individuals that you do business with on a regular basis. And the more you think about how Americans or your ethnicity group within the United States do things, and how the cultures that you are in contact with the most do things, you'll become more and more competent. We call it establishing cultural competence. And one of the other things is to use, when you're dealing with people from other cultures and you're trying to communicate, is to use English that is, I've used the word plain here, and you might wonder, what is plain English? Of course I'm going to speak plain English. Yes, you will speak plain English, but you have to make sure that your language is free of jargon and slang and sort of any dialectical preferences that you have in your own speech if you're from another part of the country. I did business for a long time with people in Texas and Atlanta, and they had a way of speaking that would be really, really tough for a lot of my foreign students. It was almost another dialect of English. So if you do speak a dialectal variation of English, be aware of it, and also just really slow down your speech and speak at a very comprehensible pace. Realize that Americans do tend to speak very, very fast. Because time is money, and we're trying to get to the point as quickly as possible. So those are just a few little quick tidbits. The most important thing about cultural differences is to think about, how does culture impact our practice? How can we deal with a culturally different client base or clients within their own mix of family cultures? What do we do when our clients themselves have intercultural marriages? If anybody even comes from an intercultural background, you know what a hot button and what a sensitive button that is. And that you can have married couples who have vastly different opinions on how to handle things like money and inheritance and acquiring wealth and distributing wealth, and that culture really does impact a lot of these decisions. So as we're going to go on in our study of culture, we'll learn how to get to some of those details. So today, in this part of the discussion, we discussed the definition of culture. We learned how we acquired culture, and we thought about the very, very beginnings of thinking about how culture might impact your practice. So those are some things to think about, and we'll do some readings in those areas and come back and look at some more details. Thank you.